So this video is going to demonstrate how to give a playable character an ability like telekinesis. So they are going to be able to lift up a barrel that's on the other side of the screen, pull it towards them, and then be able to throw it like a projectile. You can see there's only 4 assets, so it's going to be a fairly simple project. So let's get right into it. First, we're going to drag and drop the board. It's too small for what we want, so we're going to scale the Y, and then we're going to rotate the Z. Now we lower it, and that will be the floor. Let's go ahead, add a component, physics 2D, and all we need to add is a box collider. We do not need a rigid body because we don't want to move the floor. It's going to be immovable. So we want it just to be able to collide though. Second object, we're going to drag and drop the player in there. Just going to modify the name. It's actually a frame from a larger animation sequence. That's why it has that odd naming. The player is going to get a physics 2D, and let's do a polygon collider 2D. Now what you've noticed is that rather than just having a square or circle, it actually does a really good job following the borders. So that way it's more precise collision. Now in this case it won't make too much of a difference. The object's going to actually stop in front of them, but it's a good trick to know. Don't have to set them as a trigger, and we don't have to set them with a rigid body because we're really not going to be doing any movement with them, maybe later in the series. Third object, we're going to drop the barrel asset into the scene. Move that over. This is going to be given physics 2D. This will also get polygon collider. It's going to be a trigger because we need to click on it. And we're also going to add physics 2D rigid body. So far this is the only one that has a rigid body because we do indeed want to be able to give it velocity. We are for now going to get rid of the gravity scale. That's a balance issue. You can always add that in later, although we are going to give it a little bit of linear drag. Last thing, going to take the particle system, going to put it into the scene. We're going to take that, put it on top of the barrel, turning it into a child. What's going to happen is when you click on the barrel to levitate it, this particle system is going to appear to indicate that you are affecting it. In addition to it moving, we want to give a little bit more feedback to the player that they're controlling it, that they're actively controlling it. If you don't like the visual effect, you can always just not add one. I'll show you what 3 lines you don't need. So that is the basics. We have our player, we have the floor, we have the barrel, and we have the magic effect that is going to be activated when you click on the barrel. So we're going to have 2 scripts. The first script is going to be attached to the player, and to be honest, there's only really 2 lines to it. You could almost combine it into the other script, but in reality your player is going to have a script in your game anyways, so might as well have that there as a framework. So let's go ahead, right click, choose create, C#, and we'll call it hero. We'll click on the player, we'll drag and drop the script onto it, and then we'll double click to open it up. Now, first line, so public static. So first thing to point out, static. We want this variable to be available anywhere in the application. Specifically, the barrel needs to utilize it, so it needs to be static. Vector 2. This is a little bit different because other variables have 1 value. This variable actually has 2 values. As the 2 would suggest, there are 2 values to it, x and y. So, quick recap. Any object that is on the screen has an x and a y coordinate, which you see up here, position, okay? So by doing a vector 2, you're grabbing the x and you're grabbing the y. If you did a vector 3, you could also grab the z. It's a 2D game, so we don't care about z. So even though it's one variable, it's actually going to have two values, and this is really important because what you're going to see us do in the script is we're going to look at the x component and you're going to look at the y component. So up to this point, you've just had a value. You just compared whatever the variable was. Because it's a vector 2, you can actually drill down into that. You can do hero position.x or hero position.y. So I don't want to get ahead of myself, I just want to give you a heads up about that you're actually going to be able to drill down and look at the two different values that are embedded in that variable. So it's kind of different than what we've done in the other videos. The only other line is in the start. We want to take that variable and we want it to be set to the position of the object the script is attached to, which is the player. So that's it for the script. You're saying, okay, we want a static variable that can store the XY position. Okay, now we need to actually put in the XY position. Save that, and that's the first script all done. The second script is really the heavy lifting, no pun intended, is going to occur. And we will call this barrel control. Now you take barrel control, make sure barrel is highlighted, and you just drag and drop it. That way the script is applied to that object. Now let's go ahead into barrel control. We're going to open it up, and we're going to start with the bulk of what's going to be done. So let's run through these. So public vector 2 barrel position. Just like in the hero script, we want to capture the position of the barrel. So in the hero, we're capturing the position of the hero. Here we need to know the position of the barrel. For this next one, public string barrel status, basically we need to determine if the barrel is not being moved or if it is being moved and under your control. When it's under your control, idle status will change to hover. Next, we've got some variables. Public int zrot, so z rotation, because what's going to happen is when you click on the barrel and you draw it towards you, rather than just having it kind of move linear, we're going to actually have it rotating. Give it a little bit more of a special effect. X velocity, Y velocity, X val, Y val. Basically, we need to determine the speed, because when it's sitting here, it's going to be 0, 0. It's not moving, okay? But when you summon it, it's going to start moving, and it's going to be moving in a negative number, and we'll show you how to make sure the number is negative. In fact, the calculation we're going to use will work even if the player was on the other side of the screen and the barrel is over here, because the calculation is going to look to see, is this a negative or is this a positive distance? So if you want something to move left to right, you need a positive velocity. If you want it to move right to left, it needs to be a negative velocity. So the rotation of the barrel, the X velocity, the Y velocity. This last one, public game object sparkle magic. So what that's going to be is that is going to make the barrel aware of the magic. Because as a child, as we said, all this does making a child is it inherits the rotation, it inherits the velocity, that's it. The barrel can't actually like reach out and make any changes. You need to set up the variable to do that. So now that it's there, just drag and drop from the hierarchy section and bring it down there. Do not use the prefab. In fact, in yours you probably won't have a prefab because you're just going to create the particle system here and then attach it. I just had it here so I didn't have to create. I could create it ahead of time. Okay, so that's it for the variables. Now I'm going to jump ahead because there's going to be one statement that's going to be really horrible to look at. It's basically an if statement that checks a few values. So by jumping ahead and bypassing it, I'm going to show you what those values are, so when you then see them in the if statement, they'll make more sense. Before we get to that, I'm going to drop 2 lines into the start. So barrel position, again, we create that variable right here, and very similar to what we did with the hero script, get component transform position. So this is just reserving the variable. This is where you actually put a value to it, and you're dropping in the current position of the barrel. Because since there's nothing before this, get component therefore refers to the object this script is attached to. Whereas here, Sparkle Magic is before get component, so this get component is referring to this object. So sparkle magic dot get component particle system dot enable emission equals false. So what this is saying is this object, okay, so this variable, which is this object, get a component. What component? The particle system. What attribute? Enable emission. True or false? We're going to set it to false. Let's go ahead and run that. So you can see, so you've got a brief glow there, and then it's gone. We can code it so that doesn't happen, but I'm really not worried about it. This is really just the broad strokes of making this functionality work. Now I'm going to skip the update section because, as I said, there's an if statement in there, and I really wanted to explain where it comes from before jumping into it. Okay, so we said functionally what's going to happen is you click on the barrel, it shoots towards you, it stops in front of you, it's going to be rotating, you click on it again, and you're going to shoot it like a projectile. So if we're clicking on it, then that means we need on mouse down. It needs to be outside of update, it needs to be outside of start. Okay? So, void on mouse down. It's a pre-existing, a predefined coroutine, so it has to be exactly right. It is case sensitive, capital O-M-D. If you have any of those not capitalized, or you have other ones accidentally capitalized, won't work. So, when the mouse has been clicked, we now check something. We check that barrel status that we defined up here, and by default, it's idle. If barrel status, now see this exclamation point in front of the equal sign? This means not equal. Why was that decided? I couldn't tell you. Just kind of live with it that the exclamation point before the equal sign means not equal. So if barrel status is not equal to hover, well, as it turns out, at the very beginning, it is not equal to hover. So very often you check to see if something is equal. In this case, you're checking to see something is not equal. So if barrel status is not equal to hover, then we're going to modify some variables. Xval is going to be modified. Now here's what we're talking about. So hero script, okay, stores the hero POS variable, and here's the X component. So at first it looks a little crazy, but we discussed this. We're going to extract the X component of the hero position variable, which is stored in the hero script. We're going to modify it by 1. Then we minus the barrel position point X, and we divide it by 2. So in other words, what's the X position? The X position, okay, now the center is right there. Well, we don't really want the center because then the barrel would hit them. So that's why we're saying +1. We want to push it out in front of them. So, like I said, some of these positions are going to look a little crazy, but when you think about what you're doing, you don't want the barrel to be on top of them. You want it to be in front of them. So that's why you're adding 1, because like I said, when you're moving left to right, you're increasing that X position. So, again, this is very, very X and Y heavy. Almost all of what we're doing is looking at the X and Y and making modifications. The actual application of those variables only happen in a couple statements. So hero position dot x plus 1 minus barrel position dot x, that's in parentheses and divided by 2y. This is just setting a speed. You could skip this part and it would move faster. This is purely game balance, so I don't want anyone busting their brains over it. You don't have to do the divide by 2. Again, that's just game balance. Y velocity equals 0.6f. So this is making a presumption. Since the barrel is going to move up because it's positive, because as we said, moving up is a positive x velocity, moving down is a positive y velocity, Moving up is a positive y velocity, moving down is a negative y velocity. Okay? So since we're always saying increase, then it's presuming that it's on equal ground. So if you're going to actually have the player be even higher or the player be lower because this is on a stand, we'd have to modify this. But for now, since you're on a flat surface, this will work. So the x velocity is going to be the difference between the hero and the barrel. The y velocity is just going to be set to 0.6, and the rotation is set to 3. Again, this is purely a flourish. You don't even need this. You could actually do that, but it would look, to me, it looks kind of silly to see the barrel just pull towards you. Might as well, it's a very easy thing to do, so might as well add it. And then here's the sparkle magic. So sparkle magic.get component particle system enable emission equals true. In other words, just the opposite of this. So at the start, you shut it off. At the beginning, you're turning on. So all that is done if barrel status is not equal to hover. And as I said at the beginning of the scene, it is not equal to hover. So that's what I was talking about when I said I was going to jump ahead, because this is really the sequence of events. So if barrel status is equal to hover, that's what the else does. If this is not true, so if it is not equal to it, then y velocity is 0, x velocity is 15, and z rotation is -3. So what happens is so if this is not equal to hover, then you're pulling it towards you. If it is equal to hover, which is what happens when you click on it, then you're doing just the opposite. You're not doing a vertical velocity, you're doing a horizontal velocity, and this time it's going to be a positive number. And in fact, you can see it's a huge number, it's fast, and the rotation changes direction, is now -3. So it's rotating in one direction when you're pulling it towards you, rotates in the other direction when you push it away from you. To me, it kind of looks right visually. Again, you could skip the rotation if you want. I'm sorry if it makes it a little bit more complex, but I think it's really worth the effort to give it that additional flourish. So you start off the game, the barrel status is idle, you click on the barrel. Since it's not equal to hover, because it's equal to idle, it gets this negative velocity, pulling it towards the player with the sparkle magic being turned on. If you click on the object again, because remember this is only happening if on mouse down occurs. So if you click on the mouse, if you click with the mouse again, it shoots it in the opposite direction. Now let's go to the update section. We're still not going to do the big bad yet. So this is what I was talking about, where we're changing a lot of variables, but we actually only apply them in one or two places. Like here, you turn off the particle system. Here, you turn on the particle system. Here in the update section, this script is attached to the barrel. So again, this change is being done to the barrel. Transform.rotate 0, 0, 0 rotation. So since Z rotation starts off at 0, again, at the beginning of the game, it's not rotating. Get component rigid body velocity equals new velocity, new vector 2. So just as position has x and y's, as we said, the velocities are also x and y's. Again, x val, y val start off as 0. So at the very beginning, this is 0. So in other words, there's no rotation, there's no movement at the beginning of the game. You click on the mouse, x velocity is altered, basically looking at the difference between the player and the barrel. Y velocity is modified, rotation is modified, and this is where those are actually being applied. Almost done. Now we're going to look at the big bad. So, what this is saying, it's looking to see if barrel status is not equal to hover. Okay, and at the beginning, it is not equal to hover. Get component transform position dot x. So in this case, if you notice, see how there's nothing after this? We're not changing this value. So very often when you see get position, okay, we're changing it, but just like here, we're not changing it, we're simply seeing what it is. So if the x position of the barrel is less than the x position of the hero plus 3. Now, why plus 3? Very simple, because what we're doing is we're creating an area in front of here. It is extremely unlikely for you to hit the exact position you're looking for. So what we're saying is, okay, if it's within a range of values, then stop. So if the x position of the barrel is less than the x position of the hero plus 3, and the x position of the barrel is greater than the x position plus 2. In other words, you're looking at a range of 1. Difference between 3 and 2 is 1. So first you're coming out 2, then you're coming out 1 more to 3. So if it's within that area, then you're going to do some stuff. X velocity is set to 0, Y velocity is set to 0, and now barrel status is set to hover. So let's go ahead and give that a run, and that should do it. So you click on the barrel, rolls towards you, stops in front of you. So this is what I was talking about. So first of all, you don't want the barrel on top of your player. That's why you have to come out at least 1 or 2 spots, right? And also, because you don't want it to keep bouncing back and forth, you give it a range. You say, okay, if it's between 2 and 3, that's good enough. You don't have to get it to an exact location as long as it's in between there. Now that it's in the hover status, okay, so on mouse down, if it's not equal to hover, but if it is equal to hover, then x velocity gets turned to positive 15. So watch what happens when I click on it again. Boom, throws it. So that's it. So I hope my explanation worked. It's really, it's not that many lines of code, but it's really manipulating the variables more than we ever have at this point. So I'm going to put the script, and I'm going to put all the assets. I mean, there's only 3 really, 3 visual assets, into Dropbox like I usually do. That way, if my explanation didn't make a lot of sense, at least you can have the exact script and it can work on your side. But like I said, the bulk of what you're doing is you're really just looking at positions, and you're making a corresponding velocity based on those positions. So that should about do it, at least for telekinesis. So now you can click on an object, pull it towards you, and shoot it out. And like I said, if you don't like the idea of the particle system, the 3 things you would do is you would of course get rid of this, you would get rid of this, and you get rid of this. Basically those are the only lines referencing it, and that's really just turning it on and off, because the other stuff, as far as the rotation and the velocity, it's simply being inherited by being a child. So that should do it, at least for this part.